Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed my new opening theme there. It's a bit of a play on the old one. This is courtesy of Rob, whose channel Ominous Voice is a great channel. Check it out if you haven't, please. Thank you for that, Rob. As everybody will see, there is still no opening graphic, which is a bit of a problem. I'm probably going to have to resort to actually trying to come up with a graphic again. The last one I did was shit, and I lived with it for ages, but it had a copyright image on it. I'm trying to get away from that, so unless some kind person can help me out there, I'll just have to stick with another bag of crap for the next year. So we'll see what happens there. This is a response to dour films, not as in dour, miserable, boring films, but dour as in preaching Islam, dour films. And he's making this argument. I'm going to go through the steps. He's making this argument, but the conclusion is that theism should be the default position unless proven otherwise. Okay, that's his position. First, I'd just like to define theism because this is important. There are two definitions for theism. One is belief in a deity, and the other one is belief specifically in a personal deity. Now, a lot of the time when we talk about theistic gods, stuff like that, we're talking about the second one. A lot of the time we're talking about theism, we're talking about that second definition, about personal gods only. When Dour Films uses the word theism, he often means the general term, which includes, it's theism that includes deistic notions of God as well as theistic notions of God. It's important for me to make that point before we start. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the 4 points of his argument and try and sum them up briefly. Hopefully I won't misrepresent them when I do that, or strawman them as everybody's talking about. Now, it seems to be strawman, that's the buzzword at the moment on YouTube, isn't it? It's like being a fucking Wizard of Oz convention. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through these arguments then, make a few counterpoints about them, but there's a specific point I want to make to Dour Films that comes in the last couple of these points. So I want to get through them and kind of get on with this a little bit. Okay, so point one. So what he's written is, in order to accept our rational faculties are reliable, initial sensory experiences, and I would suggest that sensory experiences are the foodstuff of our rational faculties, must be accepted until proven incorrect. In other words, these experiences must be considered default positions, so that we must accept that our rational faculties acting on our sensory experiences until we have some reason to doubt them. Now, but does he mean as individuals or does he mean as a society? That's not really clear. As a society, well, we've doubted them for centuries, so that doesn't really seem to apply, does it? I am allowed to stand on the shoulders of those that have gone before, giants amongst them. But if he means as an individual, well, at which stage are we taking somebody as becoming a rational agent able to do this? Because Dour doesn't like babies being assigned as rational agents. So at what point are we saying, yeah, now that's the point where you are now at your initial sensory experience stage? That's not quite clear. Let's move on to point two. Okay, so this one, he's put the appearance of purpose, intention and order in the universe is an initially sensed experience. I'm not going to argue with that. In fact, I'm going to agree with it too much. The problem is that we try and ascribe purpose and intention to things that don't have them, like my sodding computer. It sometimes just needs a good hiding, you know, and this is part of the problem. When we go back to part one, where he's talked about rational faculties and sensory experience, we should assume that they work until they don't. We know that we ascribe things to purpose and intention to things that don't have them. So we've already falsified in quite a global scale that first premise by talking about the second premise. So unless we're assuming this idea that each individual starts afresh without any reference to any other human beings whatsoever, this could be potentially a bit of a problem, but it's a bit of a problem that I want to leave. Let's just forget about that. Move on to point three, okay? So what he's put here is, hence, the belief in the designed universe, which automatically infers the designer, and I would agree that it does, is in fact the default position until proven otherwise. Well, the first thing I would say is that they've actually, as you'll see in a minute, they've been far better off ending the argument here instead of carrying on with it, in my opinion. But the other thing is that it makes me think about what is a default position, because this is what we've been talking about so much recently, is these default positions. And there is a big difference between a scientific default position and what that infers in terms of who has to evidence what, and what you would call an intuitive default position, which is the default position that most people naturally have on an unscientific, on an instinctive level. Just a point I'd like to bring up there. So let's go on to point 4, and this is where it's going to get interesting and where I'm getting close to issuing a bit of a challenge to Dower Films. So let's have a look at what he's written here. He's put the concept of God is the most tenable explanation for the identity of the designer. That's straightforward enough. But he gives us a few details about what this God is like in this argument. And what he's arguing for is a purposeful, intelligent agent, as you would expect, outside the universe, that cannot be detected by our senses. Now, this is the definition of God that most people would give for a deistic notion of God. Not a personal God, not a theistic God, not the notion of God that Dower Films as a Muslim believes in. Dower Films tells us many, many times that he's not arguing for a deistic God, he's arguing for a general notion of God. But that's not what he's described here. He's described a deistic God. This isn't the kind of God that had a fist fight with Abraham's son Jacob, and then at the end of the fist fight renamed Jacob Israel as a result of that fight. And then Jacob said, I've been face to face with God and survived. This is what he says. I'll put a link up to you to the chapter in Genesis where that's all explained. Okay, this isn't the God that people pray to around the world, that have an expectation that prayer would be answered, that he's listening to them. This isn't the God that reveals himself to people. This is a God that cannot be detected. It's not the God that people like Pastor Jerry speak to.
The Lord revealed to me earlier this week, possibly last week, I can't remember the exact day, I know it was in the morning time.
You know, that makes me laugh every time I see that, and that's just one of them ones gets me every time. It's as if Pastor Jerry talks to God so often that he's just come a bit blasé about it, really, hasn't he? It could have been yesterday, or it could have been the day before. Who knows? It's such a mundane thing to be speaking to God. But clearly, this is not the God that Dower Films is talking about here when he talks about one that cannot be detected by our senses. Pastor Jerry's God can be detected by our senses, and Pastor Jerry's God is Dower Films' God. Let's be in no doubt about that. They both worship, Christians and Muslims worship the same God. So let's look at the conclusion. Then I've got a bit of a challenge for you, Ali. So he's put, hence, theism is the default position until proven otherwise. And theism is rather confusingly used here because, as we said at the beginning, theism can involve believing in a deity, in any theistic or deistic deity, or it can be specifically belief in a theistic notion, a personal notion of a deity. Well, he means it in the first sense. He just means it in the general sense. And the reason he means it in the general sense is because he's already specified some characteristics of God. And those characteristics of God do not fall into this personal God, theism. So let's rewrite what he's put here and see how it applies. What he's put is, hence, belief in a deity that cannot be detected by the senses should be the default position until proven otherwise. So here's my challenge to you, Dower Films. I am challenging you to renounce your Islamic faith and believe solely in a deity that cannot be detected by the senses until you have demonstrated to me otherwise. You have demonstrated to me that we can detect the existence of God in the way that Christians and Muslims claim that you can. And note, evidence is not enough. You've used the term proven. You make philosophical arguments. You will understand what using the word proven means. You see, I would have suggested that this whole argument would be a kind of like a civil case, a balance of evidence thing. But by using the word proven, you've made it into a kind of a criminal case. You've said that just evidence that prayer works isn't enough. It's got to be absolute proof. Very difficult thing to do. But I'm suggesting that if you want to stick by this, you have to prove to me the specific characteristics of a personal God. And until you can prove them, you should label yourself a deist and nothing more. Are you willing to accept that challenge, Ali? Well, thank you for watching this video. Look after yourselves.